I remember the exact moment the sirens cut through the morning air, sharp and out of place, like something had gone very wrong in a neighborhood that prided itself on being perfectly quiet. The crunch of gravel under my boots felt louder than usual as I stepped out onto the edge of my driveway. Dust hanging in the sunlight, the kind that sticks to the back of your throat if you breathe too deep. 2 patrol cars rolled to a stop right in front of me, tires pressing into the narrow access road that led up through the subdivision behind my land. The same road I'd driven 100 times without thinking twice about it. But that morning, every set of eyes from those manicured houses up the hill was locked on me. Curtains twitching, coffee cups frozen halfway to lips. I hadn't even said a word yet when one of the officers stepped out, calm, professional, but already carrying that tone like he'd been told a story before he arrived. "Sir, we got a call about unauthorized access to private property." Unauthorized. The word just sat there in the air between us. Heavy, almost absurd. I could still smell the faint asphalt from where the HOA had repaved sections of the road last month, like they were trying to stamp ownership into the ground itself. I nodded once, slow, letting the silence stretch just enough to feel uncomfortable. Because here's the thing about moments like that, people rush to explain. They get loud. They try to win. I didn't. I just looked past him, up the road, where Rebecca Holloway stood with her arms crossed, perfectly framed at the entrance to Willow Creek Estates like she owned the horizon. White SUV parked just behind her, sunglasses on, posture stiff, the kind of stillness that only comes from someone who thinks they've already won. I could almost hear her voice from the emails she'd been sending for weeks, that polished, condescending tone wrapped in fake concern. Community standards. Shared responsibility. Compliance expectations. She'd made it clear from day one that I didn't belong here, not unless I signed their paperwork, paid their fees, played by their rules. The problem was, I never agreed to any of it. I bought my land specifically because it sat outside their jurisdiction, just far enough off the grid of their control to stay invisible. Or at least, that was the plan. The officer shifted his weight, waiting for an answer, and I could feel the weight of the moment pressing in, not from him, not even from Rebecca, but from the dozens of silent witnesses watching this play out like some kind of neighborhood spectacle. My heartbeat stayed steady. My hands stayed relaxed at my sides. Because while they saw a guy standing on a dusty stretch of road being questioned by police, I saw something very different. I saw paperwork, survey lines, legal descriptions buried in county records most people never bother to read. I saw a detail so small, so overlooked, it had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. The officer cleared his throat again, a little firmer this time. "Do you live here, sir?" I let out a slow breath, tasting dust and something else underneath it, patience. "Yeah," I said quietly, my voice steady enough to cut through all of it. "I do." And Rebecca smiled. Just a slight tilt of her lips, like she'd been waiting for that answer. Like it confirmed everything she thought she knew about me. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the road her entire HOA depended on, every car, every delivery, every perfectly scheduled morning routine, ran straight through land that didn't belong to them. And I hadn't even started talking yet. The officer studied my face for a second like he was trying to decide if this was going to be a simple conversation or the kind that turns into paperwork. And I could tell he was already leaning towards simple, but Rebecca was not going to let it stay that way. She took a few steps closer, heels clicking against the pavement, that controlled, deliberate walk of someone used to being listened to. And even from where I stood, I could catch a hint of her perfume cutting through the dusty air, sharp and expensive, completely out of place out here. "Officer," she said, voice smooth but tight underneath. "This is exactly what I was talking about. He has been using our private road without authorization for weeks." I almost smiled at that word again. Our. It echoed in my head like a claim stamped on something that had never actually been hers. The officer glanced back at her, then at me. "Sir, do you have any documentation showing you are allowed access through here?" Allowed. That one almost made me laugh, but I kept it in. Instead, I reached into my truck, slow, deliberate, pulling out a worn manila folder that had been sitting behind my seat since the day I bought this place. The edges were soft from handling, corners bent just enough to show it had been opened more times than most people ever bother with paperwork. "I have documentation," I said, keeping my tone even, not defensive, not aggressive, just steady. Rebecca let out a small breath, almost like a quiet scoff, like she had already decided what was inside that folder before I even opened it. "He is not part of the HOA," she added, louder now, making sure the neighbors up the hill could hear every word. "He refused to sign. That means he has no right to use community infrastructure." There it was. The assumption. The foundation, everything she had built this little situation on. I flipped the folder open, the faint smell of paper and ink rising up. Something grounding, something real compared to all the noise around me. Inside were the documents most people never read past page 1. Survey maps, boundary descriptions, legal language that stretched on for paragraphs without a single wasted word. The officer leaned in slightly, not too close, just enough to see that this was not some random stack of papers. I tapped one page with my finger, right where the lines intersected. "This parcel," I said, pointing to the shaded section that represented my land, "includes the full width of this access road for about 480 feet. I let that sit there for a second, not pushing it, just letting the words exist. The officer's eyes followed the line on the page, then flicked up toward the road beneath his feet, like he was connecting two pieces of information that had not lined up before. Rebecca stepped closer, her tone sharpening. "That is not correct. This road was developed with the subdivision. It is maintained by the HOA." I nodded slightly. "Maintained," I repeated. "That is not the same as owned." You could feel the shift then. It was subtle, but it was there, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. The officer straightened a little, his attention now fully on the document instead of the situation Rebecca had described. "Do you have anything indicating an easement agreement?" he asked, more careful now, more neutral. I flipped to another page, slower this time, letting the paper slide under my fingers. "There was one," I said. "Temporary access during initial development. It expired 8 years ago. It was never renewed." Silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that makes people start second-guessing what they thought they knew. I could hear a screen door somewhere up the hill creak open, someone stepping out to get a better look, gravel shifting under their shoes. Rebecca's voice came back, tighter now, less polished. "That is not how this works. You cannot just claim a road that an entire community depends on." I met her eyes for the first time since the officers arrived, calm, steady, no anger in it at all. "I did not claim anything," I said quietly. "I bought it that way." And that was the moment her expression changed, just slightly, just enough for the confidence to crack at the edges, because for the first time since this started, the conversation was no longer about what she believed, it was about what could actually be proven. The officer let out a slow breath, and I could see the shift happen in real time, not just in his posture, but in the way he looked at Rebecca now, like he was recalibrating the situation in his head. The authority she had been leaning on a minute ago started to thin out, replaced by something more cautious, more procedural. "Ma'am," he said, turning slightly toward her, "if what he is saying is accurate, this may not be a criminal matter." That word landed differently than everything else that morning. Not criminal. Rebecca blinked once, then twice, like her brain was trying to reject the sentence entirely. "Excuse me," she said, sharper now, the polished tone slipping just enough to show what was underneath. "He is trespassing on private community property." I closed the folder halfway, not rushing, letting the paper slide against itself with that soft, deliberate sound. "That is the part you keep getting wrong," I said, still calm, still level. "It is not community property." One of the neighbors up the hill shifted closer to the edge of the road, pretending to check their mailbox, but clearly listening, the quiet hum of suburban curiosity building like pressure. The officer looked back at me. "Sir, just so I understand, you are saying this entire stretch of road is within your parcel boundaries?" I nodded once. "From that curve up there," I said, pointing toward the bend where the pavement narrowed between two rows of trimmed hedges, down to the county marker at the entrance. About 480 feet. He followed my gesture, eyes tracing the exact path every car behind him had taken to get here, including his own. You could almost see the realization settle in. Rebecca stepped forward again, closer than before, her voice tightening with every word. "This is ridiculous. We have maintained this road for years. We paved it. We plow it. We manage access. That gives us rights." I tilted my head slightly. "It gives you usage," I said, "not ownership." There was a difference, and for the first time, she could feel it. The officer cleared his throat again, but this time it sounded less like authority and more like someone trying to keep things from escalating. "Do you have documentation of any current easement agreement, ma'am?" he asked her. Rebecca hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Enough for everyone watching to notice. "We have HOA records," she said, quickly, almost too quickly. "Covenants, agreements, community infrastructure documents." He nodded politely, but there was a gap now between what she was saying and what he needed to hear. "Anything filed with the county?" he asked. Silence. Not loud, not dramatic, just a small, quiet absence where confidence used to be. I did not interrupt. I did not push. I just stood there, dust settling around my boots, the sun creeping higher, warming the metal of my truck beside me. Because this part mattered. Not the argument. Not the win. The truth revealing itself without me forcing it. Rebecca folded her arms tighter, her sunglasses still hiding her eyes, but her jaw had set in a way that told me everything I needed to know. "This road serves the entire neighborhood," she said, slower now, like she was trying to rebuild control one word at a time. "You cannot just disrupt that." I met her gaze again, steady, no edge in it. "I have not disrupted anything," I said. "You called the police." That landed harder than anything else I had said so far. The officer glanced between us, then backed down at the document still open in my hand. "Look," he said, more measured now. "This sounds like a civil dispute over property rights. That is not something we can enforce out here on the spot." Rebecca exhaled sharply, the sound tight, controlled, but no longer confident. "So you were just going to let him use our road?" she asked. The officer shook his head slightly. "Ma'am, I am saying I cannot remove someone from a property without clear evidence they do not have a right to be there." Another pause, longer this time. He gestured lightly toward my folder. "And right now, he has documentation suggesting otherwise." The weight of that sentence settled over everything. The neighbors, the road, the carefully built illusion of control Rebecca had been standing on. I closed the folder completely this time, tucking it back under my arm, feeling the rough edge of the paper press against my fingers. Because the truth was, this was never about winning an argument in the street. This was about something much quieter, much more permanent. And as the silence stretched out between us, I could tell she was starting to understand that whatever she thought she controlled here, it was not as solid as she believed. The officer gave me a final nod, the kind that closes a situation without making it worse, then stepped back toward his cruiser, gravel shifting under his boots as the tension that had filled the road just minutes ago began to loosen, not disappear, just change shape. His partner followed, both of them climbing back into their cars with that quiet efficiency that said this was no longer their problem. Engine started low and steady, and as the patrol cars rolled back down the road, the sound of tires over gravel lingered longer than it should have, like an echo of everything that had just happened. When the last car disappeared around the bend, the silence that followed felt heavier than the sirens had. No one moved at first. Not the neighbors watching from their driveways, not Rebecca standing 10 feet in front of me, not even me. The air felt different now, like something invisible had shifted, and everyone could feel it even if they could not name it. Rebecca was the first to break it. She took off her sunglasses slowly, revealing eyes that were no longer calm, no longer controlled, but calculating, searching for something she could still hold on to. "This is not over," she said, her voice lower now, stripped of that polished edge, replaced with something more direct. "You are interfering with a functioning community. That has consequences." I tilted my head slightly, studying her for a second, not with anger, not with frustration, just with a kind of quiet curiosity. "I am not interfering with anything," I said. "You built your system on an assumption." Her jaw tightened. "We build a neighborhood," she shot back. "People live here. Families depend on that road every single day." I nodded once. "I know," I said. "I see them every morning." And that was true. The early commute traffic, the school drop-offs, the delivery trucks that came through like clockwork. I had watched all of it from the edge of my land, never saying a word, never needing to. Because up until now, it had not mattered. She took a step closer, closing the space between us just enough to make it personal. "Then act like it," she said. "Stop making this difficult." I let out a slow breath, the dust still faint in the air, the sun now high enough to cast sharp shadows across the road. "You called the police on me for using my own property," I said, not raising my voice, not pushing, just stating it plain. That stopped her for half a second. Not long, but enough. Around us, the neighbors had stopped pretending. A couple stood openly at the end of their driveway now, arms crossed, watching like this was something they needed to understand before it affected them too. A man farther up the hill shook his head slightly, not at me, but at the situation, like he was starting to realize how thin the line really was between control and overreach. Rebecca followed my gaze for a brief moment, then snapped back, pulling herself upright again. "We have legal counsel," she said quickly. "If you think a few papers change that, you are mistaken." I gave a small nod. "That is good," I said. "You should talk to them." That was not sarcasm. That was advice. And I think that made it land harder. Because for the first time, there was no fight coming from me. No resistance she could push against. Just facts sitting there, unmoving. The kind that do not need to be defended. She stared at me for a second longer, searching for something to grab onto. Some sign that I was bluffing, that this was temporary, that she could still force this back into the shape she was used to. But there was nothing there for her to take. Just a man standing on a stretch of road that, whether she liked it or not, was not hers. "We will see," she said finally, slipping her sunglasses back on like armor, turning sharply toward her SUV. The door opened, then slammed shut with a clean, controlled sound, and a second later the engine came to life, smooth and quiet. She pulled away without another word, tires rolling over the same road she had claimed just minutes earlier, disappearing up toward the houses that had always believed that road belonged to them. I stood there for a moment longer after she was gone, listening to the quiet settle back in, the distant hum of normal life starting to return. A car door up the hill closed. Someone laughed nervously. A screen door creaked again. The neighborhood was already trying to move past it. But I knew better, because nothing had actually been resolved. Not yet. What happened this morning was just the first crack. And cracks like that do not close on their own. They spread, slowly, quietly, until the entire structure has to be rebuilt on something real. By late afternoon, the road felt different under my boots, like it had finally decided to tell the truth after years of letting someone else speak for it. The dust had settled, but the tension had not. It just shifted into something quieter, something that moved behind doors and through phone calls instead of out in the open. I could feel it before I even saw it. The first sign came around 4:30, when a black sedan I had never seen before rolled slowly up the access road, tires barely making a sound against the pavement, like whoever was inside did not want to draw attention but also did not want to be ignored. It stopped about 20 feet from where I stood near the edge of my property line, engine idling low, tinted windows reflecting the fading sunlight. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out, mid-50s maybe, clean pressed shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to look practical but not casual. He glanced once at the road, then at me, then back at the houses up the hill like he was mapping the situation in real time. "You must be Ethan," he said, walking over with a measured pace, not aggressive, not friendly, just deliberate. I nodded once. "Depends who is asking." That earned a small, tight smile. "Daniel Brooks. I represent Willow Creek Estates." Of course he did. I could almost hear Rebecca's voice behind that introduction, sharp and controlled, already framing the narrative before he even got here. He stopped a few feet away, giving just enough space to keep things professional. "I understand there was a situation earlier involving law enforcement," he said. "I would like to clarify a few things before this escalates unnecessarily." The word unnecessarily hung there, like a suggestion more than a statement. I crossed my arms lightly, feeling the warmth of the sun still trapped in the fabric of my shirt. "You should probably start with what you think is happening," I said. He nodded, like he expected that. "The association has maintained that roadway for over a decade." He began, calm, practiced, the kind of tone that comes from saying the same thing in multiple rooms. "Maintenance, improvements, access management. That establishes a pattern of use that carries legal weight." I listened without interrupting, letting him lay it out completely, because people, like him, always reveal more than they intend when they are uninterrupted. When he finished, I gave a small nod. "Pattern of use does not override recorded ownership," I said. "You know that." His expression did not change much, but there was a flicker there, quick, controlled. "Ownership can be complicated," he replied, "especially when multiple parties rely on a shared asset." I gestured lightly toward the road. "It is not shared if there is no active easement." That landed cleaner than anything else so far. No emotion, just fact. He exhaled slowly, glancing down the length of the road again, then back at me. Let me ask you something directly, he said. Are you planning to restrict access? There it was. Not a threat. Not yet. Just the question that mattered. I shook my head once. I am planning to define it. He watched me for a second, measuring that answer, trying to figure out how much of it was strategy and how much was principle. Because if access becomes limited, he continued, you are going to affect dozens of homeowners. Deliveries, emergency services, daily life. That is not something the association can ignore. I nodded slightly. Neither is being told I do not belong on my own property. That shifted the tone again. Not louder, just more real. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of a lawn mower started somewhere up the hill, distant, normal, like the rest of the world had already decided this was just another afternoon. Daniel adjusted his stance slightly, hands settling at his sides. There is a path forward here, he said finally. An agreement. Something formal. We can compensate for access rights, establish clear terms. Everyone benefits. I looked at him, really looked this time, past the words, past the structure of the conversation, at what this actually was. Not control. Not even conflict anymore. Negotiation. You should have started with that, I said quietly. He gave a small nod, almost respectful. Sometimes people have to understand the situation first, he replied. I glanced once more at the road, at the quiet stretch of pavement that had carried years of assumptions without question. I understood it the day I bought the land, I said. The question is, do they? And for the first time since this started, it felt like the answer was finally starting to matter. That night, I did not turn on the lights right away. I sat on the tailgate of my truck with the engine off, the metal still warm from the sun, listening to the quiet stretch out across the land like it always did once the neighborhood settled down. You could hear things at night that disappeared during the day. The faint hum of distant traffic miles away, the soft rustle of trees along the property line, the occasional crunch of gravel as someone came home late, tires rolling carefully like they suddenly understood this road was not just another piece of pavement. I had seen that look before. People drive differently when they realize something has changed, even if they cannot explain what it is yet. Around 9:15, headlights appeared at the top of the road, slower than usual, cautious. A sedan eased its way down, then another behind it, both moving like they were testing something invisible under their wheels. The first car stopped about 10 yards from where I sat. The window rolled down halfway, and a man leaned slightly toward the opening, hesitant but trying to stay polite. Hey, he called out, voice careful, like he was not sure what kind of conversation this was going to be. You are Ethan, right? I nodded once, staying where I was. Depends who is asking. I said again, same answer, same tone. He gave a small, nervous chuckle, glancing briefly at the person in the passenger seat before looking back at me. Name is Carl. We live up there, he said, gesturing vaguely up the hill where the houses sat in neat rows under porch lights and trimmed hedges. We heard there was some kind of issue earlier. Issue. That was one way to put it. I let the word sit there for a second, then nodded. There was a misunderstanding, I said. He exhaled slightly, like that answer mattered more than he expected. So, are we still good to use the road? There it was. Not a demand. Not an accusation. Just a question from someone who had nothing to do with how this started, but everything to lose if it went the wrong way. I slid off the tailgate and stood up, brushing the dust from my hands, feeling the cool night air settle in. You have been using it this whole time, I said. I have not stopped anyone. He nodded quickly. Right? Yeah, I just you know how it is. People are talking. Some are saying it might get blocked off or something. I glanced down the road, the faint glow of streetlights stretching along the path like a line drawn through the dark. People tend to jump ahead of facts, I said. That is how this started in the first place. The passenger leaned slightly forward then, a woman about the same age, her voice softer but more direct. We are not trying to cause problems, she said. We just want to understand what is going on. I looked at both of them for a moment, really looked, not as part of the situation, not as extensions of the HOA, but as people who just wanted to get home without stepping into something bigger than they signed up for. What is going on, I said slowly, is that the road you are on crosses land that was never transferred to the association. It was used, maintained, but never legally secured. Carl frowned slightly, processing that. So what does that mean? I took a breath, letting the cool air fill my chest. It means the assumption everyone has been operating under is not accurate, I said. And now it needs to be corrected. Silence settled again, but this time it was different. Not tense, just thoughtful. The kind that comes when something simple turns out to be more complicated than expected. Are you going to shut it down? He asked after a second, quieter now. I shook my head. No, I said. I'm going to make sure it is handled the right way. He nodded slowly, like that answer was not perfect, but it was fair. Okay, he said. That is good to hear. The car idled for another second. Then he gave a small wave and rolled the window back up. The sedan eased forward, tires moving carefully over the same stretch of road that had caused all of this, then disappeared into the quiet glow of the neighborhood above. I stood there for a while after they were gone, listening to the night settle back in, thinking about how fast assumptions can turn into conflict when no one stops to check what is actually true. Because this was never about blocking a road. It was about something much simpler. Something most people forget until it matters. Respect does not come from rules written on paper. It comes from understanding what is actually yours and what never was. By the next morning, the air felt sharper, like something had been decided overnight even though no one had said it out loud. The sky was clear, that pale blue you only get before the heat settles in, and the road stretched quiet in front of me, unchanged on the surface but carrying a different kind of weight underneath. I had already been up for an hour, coffee gone cold on the hood of my truck, when I heard the sound that told me this was not going to stay quiet much longer. Not engines. Not footsteps. Paper. The faint flap of something being pressed against wood. I turned just enough to see a man in a county vest walking up to the edge of the road, clipboard tucked under his arm, a bright orange notice in his hand. He worked carefully, like someone who knew people were watching even if he could not see them, smoothing the paper flat against a temporary stake someone had driven into the ground right where the pavement met my property line. The metal staple gun snapped twice, sharp and final. He stepped back, checked it, then nodded to himself before heading back down the road without saying a word to me. I walked over slowly, boots pressing into the gravel, and read the notice as the morning sun caught the edges of the paper. Property boundary clarification pending review. Unauthorized infrastructure usage under investigation. Clean language. Neutral. But it hit harder than any argument yesterday. Because this was not opinion. This was process. I could feel the shift ripple outward almost immediately. A garage door up the hill opened halfway, then stopped. Someone stood there watching. A second door opened farther up. Phones came out. Not openly. Not obvious. Just enough. By 8:30, the first car rolled down slower than I had ever seen, stopping short of the notice like it might mean something more than it did. The driver leaned out, squinting at the orange sheet, then glanced over at me, standing a few yards away. Is that from the county? He asked, voice uncertain. I nodded once. They are reviewing the recorded boundaries, I said. He let out a breath, long and low. So this is real. It was not really a question. I gave a small nod. It has always been real, I said. Now it is just being acknowledged. He shook his head slightly, not in disagreement, just in disbelief, then eased his car forward and continued up the road, slower than before, like he was driving over something invisible he did not fully understand. Around 9, Rebecca's SUV appeared at the top of the hill, moving faster than the others had, controlled but deliberate. She stopped hard when she saw the notice, the front of her vehicle dipping slightly as the brakes caught. For a moment, she did not move. Then the driver's door opened, and she stepped out, sunglasses already on, posture locked tight, like she was holding herself together by force. She walked straight to the notice, read it once, then again, her hand tightening slightly at her side. You went to the county, she said without looking at me. Not a question. I took a sip from my now lukewarm coffee, the bitterness sitting on my tongue. I confirmed what was already on record, I said. She turned then, fast, the controlled image from yesterday cracking just enough to show frustration underneath. You are escalating this, she said. You could have handled this privately. I set the cup down on the hood, the metal making a soft, hollow sound. I tried to handle it quietly, I said. You called the police. That landed again, just like it had before, but this time there was no crowd, no officers, no noise to absorb it. Just the two of us and a piece of paper that said more than either of us needed to. She looked back at the notice, then up the road, then back at me, calculating, adjusting, trying to find a new angle that still gave her control. "This will affect everyone," she said, slower now, more measured. "You understand that, right?" I nodded. "That is why it needs to be done correctly," I said. "Not assumed." The wind picked up slightly, just enough to lift the edge of the orange paper, making it flutter once against the staple before settling back into place. Rebecca watched it for a second, her jaw tight, then exhaled slowly. Not defeated. Not yet. But no longer certain. "We will be in touch," she said finally, turning back toward her SUV. This time, when she drove away, it was not fast, not controlled, just quiet. And as her car disappeared back up the road, I looked at the notice again, bright against the muted colors of the morning, and realized something simple. Yesterday was about proving a point. Today was about making it official. And once something like that starts moving through the right channels, it does not stop halfway. By midweek, the road had stopped pretending to be just a road. It had become a line people noticed, a boundary they felt even if they could not see it. Every car that passed slowed just a little, tires whispering over the pavement like they were asking permission instead of assuming it. The orange notice was still there, edges curling slightly under the sun, but it did not need to say anything anymore. The message had already spread. Around 10 in the morning, I heard the low rumble of a truck coming up from the county entrance, heavier than a normal pickup, steady, official. It rolled into view a few seconds later, white with a faded seal on the door, the kind of vehicle that does not rush because it does not have to. It stopped right at the marker where the notice stood, and two people stepped out, one carrying a tripod, the other a case that clicked open with a clean metallic snap. Surveyors. The kind who do not argue. The kind who measure. I walked over, boots crunching lightly, the dry air already warming up for the day. The older of the two glanced up, gave a short nod. "Morning," he said, voice neutral, practiced. "We are here to verify recorded boundaries." I nodded back. "You are in the right place." He did not ask questions. Did not need to. They set up their equipment with a quiet precision, the tripod legs digging into the ground, the instrument leveling out with small, exact adjustments. The younger one walked the line slowly, stopping at points that meant nothing to anyone else, placing markers, checking angles, writing numbers that looked random but were anything but. And that is when the neighborhood really started paying attention. One by one, people appeared. Not all at once. Just enough to show that no one was ignoring this anymore. A woman stood at the end of her driveway with her phone in her hand, not recording, just holding it like a reflex. A man farther up leaned against his garage frame, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the tripod like it might decide something about his life in the next 10 minutes. Around 11, Rebecca's SUV came back. Slower this time. Careful. She parked a little farther back than before, like she did not want to be at the center of it, but also could not stay away. She stepped out, sunglasses on again, but the posture had changed. Less certainty. More calculation. She walked toward the surveyors, stopping just short of their work area. "Excuse me," she said, controlled but tight. "Who authorized this?" The older surveyor did not even look up from his instrument. "County review," he said simply. "Boundary verification request." She glanced toward me, then back at him. "On what grounds?" He adjusted the scope slightly, then answered without emotion. "Recorded ownership discrepancy. Clean. Direct. Final." Rebecca inhaled slowly, then turned to me. "You filed this," she said. I shook my head once. "I confirmed it," I replied. The younger surveyor placed another marker into the ground, tapping it down with a small rubber mallet, the dull thud echoing just enough to be noticed. That sound carried. It made things feel permanent. Rebecca watched it happen, her expression tightening for just a second before she pulled it back under control. "This is unnecessary," she said, louder now. Not just to me but to the people watching. "We have been using this road for years without issue." One of the neighbors, the same man from the night before, Carl, stepped a little closer from his driveway. "I think that is the point," he said carefully. "We just assumed." That word landed differently coming from him. Not defensive, not aggressive, just honest. Rebecca looked at him, surprised, like she had not expected anyone to speak up that way. "Assumed or not. The community depends on this," she said. "This affects everyone." I stepped forward just enough to be part of the conversation without taking it over. "That is why it has to be done right," I said. Not just maintained. Defined. The older surveyor finally straightened up, adjusting the instrument, then looked down the line they had been mapping. "We will have preliminary confirmation by this afternoon," he said, almost to himself, but loud enough for all of us to hear. "Final report goes to the county within 48 hours. 48 hours. You could feel that number settle into the air. Not immediate, not distant, just enough time for reality to catch up with assumption. Rebecca said nothing after that. She just stood there for another moment, watching the markers, the measurements, the quiet work that did not care about opinions or authority. Then she turned, walked back to her SUV, and drove away without another word. And as the surveyors continued, numbers lining up with lines that had always been there whether anyone respected them or not, I realized something simple. You can argue against a person. You can pressure a situation. But you cannot negotiate with facts once they are measured. The final report arrived just before noon 2 days later, not with sirens or announcements, but with a quiet email and a stamped copy delivered to the same wooden stake where the orange notice had been hanging. The paper was crisp, official, the kind that does not raise its voice because it does not need to. I stood there reading it while the sun pressed down overhead, the heat radiating off the pavement in slow waves, and for a moment the entire road felt still, like it was waiting for someone to say what it already knew. Confirmed boundary alignment, it read. Access roadway located within privately owned parcel. No active easement on record. Simple. Direct. Final. I folded the paper once, then again, not rushing, just letting it settle into my hands like something that had always been there finally had a voice. By the time I looked up, I could feel the shift again, bigger this time. Not tension. Not confusion. Acceptance. People were already moving differently. A delivery truck slowed to a near stop before passing, the driver glancing at me, then giving a small nod, like he understood something had changed even if no one had explained it to him. Around 1 o'clock, the black sedan came back. Same quiet engine, same measured pace. Daniel stepped out again, but this time he did not lead with words. He looked at the stake, at the paper, then at me, and nodded once, acknowledging what both of us already knew. "We received the report," he said, voice calm, but stripped of the earlier negotiation tone. "It aligns with what you presented." I leaned against the side of my truck, the metal warm under my palm. "It was always going to," I said. He gave a small, almost resigned exhale. "The association wants to move forward with a formal agreement," he continued. "Permanent access easement. Compensation. Maintenance responsibilities clearly defined. No ambiguity." There it was. Not pressure. Not authority. Just reality catching up. I studied him for a second, then glanced up the road where a few neighbors stood at a distance, not hiding it anymore, just waiting. "And the terms?" I asked. He held up a folder, similar to mine, but newer, edges sharp. "Shared access rights, emergency service guarantees, and acknowledgement of ownership," he said. "In writing." I nodded slowly. That last part mattered more than anything. Not the money, not the maintenance. The acknowledgement. The truth, finally put where it could not be ignored again. "That is a start," I said. He stepped closer, offering the folder, but not pushing it into my hands. "They also want to address what happened earlier this week," he added. I raised an eyebrow slightly. "Which part?" He hesitated, just enough to show this was not rehearsed. "The call to law enforcement," he said. "That should not have happened." I let that sit there for a second, the memory of sirens still sharp enough to feel if I thought about it too long. Then I nodded once. "No, it should not have." He waited, like he expected more, but there was nothing else to add. Some things do not need to be stretched out to make a point. Around us, the neighborhood had gone quiet again, but this time it was not uncertainty. It was attention. People watching something resolve the right way. I took the folder from his hand, flipping it open just enough to see the structure, the language, the intent. Clean. Professional. Real. "I will review it," I said. He nodded. "That is all we ask." He turned to leave, then paused for a second, glancing back at the road, then at me. "For what it is worth," he said, "this could have gone very differently." I gave a small nod. It almost did. He held my gaze for a second, then gave a short, respectful nod before walking back to his car. The sedan pulled away quietly, disappearing down the same stretch of road that had carried assumptions for years and now carried something else entirely. I stood there for a while after he left, the paper in my hand, the road stretching out in front of me like it always had, unchanged in shape, but not in meaning. Because in the end, nothing dramatic happened. No gates, no barriers, no grand show of control. Just a line drawn where it should have been all along, and people finally willing to see it. And as the afternoon settled in, the sound of tires on pavement returned to normal, steady, unforced. I realized something simple that most people miss until it matters. Justice is not loud. It does not need to be. It just waits until the truth is clear enough that no one can pretend otherwise.